Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm 38, and for the past 11 years, I've been married to Violet, my wife. I work as an automotive mechanic at a local shop in Rochester, Minnesota, and I've always taken pride in doing a solid day's work, covered in grease and oil, the smell of motor oil lingering on my hands long after the engine's cooled. Violet is a freelance graphic designer, often working from our small home office in the corner of our living room. We don't have children, a decision made early in our marriage due to financial pressures and her insistence on focusing on her career, and I had accepted it, though sometimes, on long nights, I felt the quiet of the house too deeply. Our life has always been simple, predictable. Grocery runs at the nearby Cub Foods, Saturday mornings spent watching baseball, and evenings filled with the glow of our living room lamp and the soft hum of her computer. But lately, things felt slightly off, like the quiet static you notice just before a storm. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes. She was more distracted than usual, a little terse when I asked about her day, sometimes disappearing for stretches without explanation. That morning, for instance, I returned from the shop to find her standing at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging mugs and plates. "I'm heading out this afternoon," she said, almost casually, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Claire invited me to a little holiday get-together downtown. Just a small party, nothing serious." I paused, wiping grease from my hands onto my work shirt. "Holiday party, huh? Sure, sounds fun." Her eyes flicked away quickly, avoiding mine for a moment longer than usual, a slight tension in her shoulders. She grabbed her coat and bag, muttering about meeting a friend for coffee first. As she walked out, I noticed the faint scent of a perfume I hadn't smelled on her in years. Something heavier than her usual floral notes, spicy and unfamiliar. My chest tightened slightly. Was I imagining it? Or had she changed something? The first pang of suspicion hit me that evening when she was gone longer than she said she would. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. People run late, I told myself. Maybe the coffee ran long, maybe traffic downtown. But when she called to say she was stuck with a friend and wouldn't be back until later, the words sounded rehearsed, too precise, too careful. In the kitchen, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, remnants of her hurried morning preparations. I wandered over to the window and watched the streetlights flicker over the quiet neighborhood. My mind raced. Was she really just meeting a friend? Or had something changed in the small, steady life we'd built together? I tried to reason with myself. Violet had been under a lot of stress lately. Her freelance work had taken a sudden dip in contracts, and our bills were stacking up faster than usual. Maybe this was just her way of taking a break, I thought, an innocent social escape. But the way she had checked her phone 3 times before leaving, her hurried steps, the faint perfume, it all lodged in my chest, a quiet alarm bell I couldn't ignore. That night, I went to bed feeling a strange mixture of fatigue and unease. Violet returned much later than she'd said, the holiday lights outside casting long shadows across the living room. She smiled, a little too brightly, dropped her bag on the floor, and whispered, "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was insane." Her eyes didn't meet mine for more than a moment. The sound of her laughter felt hollow, like an echo of the warmth we used to share. I lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep, listening to the house settle around me, wondering if I was imagining everything. Had she always been this distant, or was this new? The thought gnawed at me, small and persistent, like a leak in a tire I couldn't find. There was something she wasn't telling me, and for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of doubt. Not just about her, but about the life we'd built together, the trust I'd taken for granted. The next morning, over breakfast, she chatted lightly about holiday plans and invoices she'd been sending to clients. But when her phone buzzed, she immediately tucked it under her arm and glanced at it nervously. "Just work stuff," she said, but her hand shook slightly. I watched her, heart tightening. Something about that motion felt deliberate. I forced a smile, stirring my coffee slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But deep down, a small, insistent thought kept returning. She's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what. This initial phase of suspicion marks the erosion of trust in Kevin's marriage, a common psychological response to subtle cues of deception. Violet's evasive behaviors, avoiding eye contact, rehearsed excuses, and unusual perfume, trigger Kevin's intuition, leading to cognitive dissonance where he rationalizes her actions as stress-related while inwardly acknowledging the discord. Emotionally, this fosters denial as a defense mechanism, allowing Kevin to preserve the illusion of stability in their predictable life. Interpersonally, it highlights how unaddressed issues like financial pressures and emotional distance can amplify minor anomalies into alarm bells. The quiet unease Kevin experiences reflects the human tendency to avoid painful truths, yet his emerging resolve to investigate signifies the first step toward confronting betrayal, potentially catalyzing personal growth by forcing self-reflection on taken-for-granted trust. This event underscores that denial, while protective short-term, prolongs emotional turmoil and delays necessary interpersonal reckoning. The days after Violet's holiday party felt strange, almost suspended in a quiet tension I couldn't shake. I went through the motions: work at the shop, fixing engines, wiping my hands on the rag-stained apron. But every ping of a text or buzz of a notification made my chest tighten. Violet was home, yet somehow distant, flitting between the office and living room like a shadow, phone in hand, lips pressed tight as if keeping secrets from the very air around her. Started small. A casual comment here, a distracted glance there. One evening, as I returned from a long shift, I found her meticulously arranging the holiday decorations on the mantel, humming softly. "Hey, you're home early," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, then tucked it quickly into her sweater pocket. "Just a reminder from a client," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I tried to push it aside. "Work stress," I reasoned. "She's probably worried about bills." But when I caught her in the kitchen later that night, whispering hurriedly into her phone while pressing her hand over the mouthpiece, my stomach dropped. Her laughter, the tiniest squeak of mirth, felt wrong, too sharp, too precise. I stood frozen in the doorway, uncertain if I had imagined it. She hung up quickly, cheeks pink, and smiled when she noticed me. "Everything okay?" I asked, voice casual, though it felt like a whisper over a cliff. "Yes," she said, nodding briskly, and moved past me, carrying a stack of papers. By midweek, the small anomalies multiplied. Receipts started appearing mysteriously in her purse. Expensive cafe drinks, a boutique she claimed to just browse, and parking charges downtown. I tried to rationalize, telling myself she was treating herself, a reward after stressful deadlines. But the nagging doubt persisted, like a low hum under the tires as I drove home each evening. One Friday, I decided to check the mail before she got home. A plain envelope caught my eye, labeled with a name I didn't recognize: Andrew Mitchell. The handwriting was precise, formal. Inside was a short note: "Looking forward to seeing you again this weekend." My hands shook slightly as I folded it back. I told myself nothing yet. Maybe an old friend, a distant cousin. But the seed of suspicion had rooted. Later that night, we tried to have dinner together. I asked about the envelope casually, hoping she'd offer clarity. "Oh, that?" she said with a small laugh that sounded forced. "Just a work colleague. Nothing important." Her hand trembled as she poured herself wine. I noticed, but I let it pass. I wanted to believe her. I always wanted to believe her. But the next day confirmed my unease. Violet announced she had to meet a friend for holiday shopping, leaving mid-morning with her coat buttoned too tightly, bags slung over her shoulder. I waved her off, telling myself I had nothing to worry about. Hours later, the phone rang. It wasn't her. It was a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice. "Hi, is Violet there?" She left her wallet. My pulse jumped. "Which wallet?" I asked cautiously. "The one with the green leather strap," he replied. "That green wallet? The one she carried when she left the house this morning." My hands gripped the counter, and I felt heat rush to my face. When she returned that evening, her story was seamless. "I found it in the cafe," she said, calm, eyes wide with a practiced innocence. I nodded slowly, my gut twisting. Right? I murmured, my voice tighter than I intended. Then came the first direct clue I couldn't ignore. While she was out for a brief walk, I tidied the living room and noticed her tablet left unlocked on the sofa. Curiosity and dread collided. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Inside, there were a few innocuous emails, but one was flagged, from A. Mitchell. Opened carefully, it contained a string of messages, increasingly warm, recalling old jokes, memories, and personal moments from years ago. Remember that trip to Chicago? Best night ever. One message read, thinking of you often. Another. I closed the tablet, breathing hard. The proof was circumstantial, nothing physical, yet it gnawed at my chest. Had our marriage really been a safe harbor, or had I missed signs for months, maybe years? The tension built over the next week. At the grocery store, Violet suddenly asked, almost defensively, "Do you need me to pick up anything else for the party?" I froze. Party? I repeated, my mind racing. Oh, the shopping, I meant. The friends thing, she said quickly, shifting her gaze to the floor. At night, the small behaviors escalated. She left her phone charging in a different room, walked briskly when answering calls, and laughed at messages with a soft tremor in her voice. I found myself checking our shared calendar, noticing sudden gaps where she was unaccounted for. The trust I'd once carried like armor felt thin, perforated. A minor, almost cruel twist came when our neighbor, Marcy, mentioned seeing her at a cafe midweek, sitting across from a man I'd never seen before. Violet had told me she was home finishing a client project. I smiled politely, feeling an icy knot form in my stomach, nodding to Marcy, though I heard nothing she said afterward. My mind was spinning. Was this a coincidence? A friend? Or something far worse? By the end of the week, I felt like a man in a fog, drifting between hope and suspicion. I wanted to confront her, demand truth, yet a part of me clung to reason. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe the stress of work and bills had made me insecure. But the notes, the receipts, the strange glances, they were pieces of a puzzle I could no longer ignore. As suspicions accumulate through receipts, mysterious envelopes, and overheard whispers, Kevin grapples with escalating cognitive dissonance, oscillating between hope and doubt. Psychologically, this represents the conflict avoidance stage, where denial served as a buffer against the pain of potential betrayal, rooted in attachment theory's fear of losing a long-term bond. Emotionally, the fog he describes evokes anxiety and hypervigilance, common in partners sensing infidelity, eroding self-esteem as he questions his own perceptions. Interpersonally, Violet's defensive corrections and hidden phone use exemplify gaslighting elements, subtly shifting blame and intensifying Kevin's isolation. The neighbor's sighting acts as external validation, piercing denial and compelling evidence gathering. This buildup illustrates betrayal's consequences. Fractured trust leads to emotional detachment, but also fosters resilience, as Kevin's refusal to ignore clues signals emerging empowerment and the interpersonal lesson that unheeded signs can deepen relational wounds if not addressed promptly. That Friday evening, as snow began to fall softly against the window panes, Violet left again for her friend's night. I stood by the living room lamp, staring at the street, the muted glow of streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. My chest was tight, my hands shook, and for the first time in 11 years, I realized something had changed between us, something she wasn't telling me, and I would not rest until I knew the truth. The snowstorm had passed, leaving a brittle quiet over the neighborhood. I woke early that Saturday, the house still and cold, the hum of the heater doing little to chase away the chill in my chest. Violet was still asleep, curled under the duvet, her phone lying face down on the nightstand. My resolve hardened as I watched it. I needed answers. This wasn't about paranoia anymore. This was about clarity, about understanding the fracture that had crept into our 11 years together. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. In a different life, in a marriage built on trust, I would have turned away. But the seed of doubt had grown into a tree, and I had to see its roots. Unlocking it, I scrolled through messages, searching for patterns, names, dates. At first, I found only innocuous conversation with colleagues and old friends. Then, buried beneath a folder labeled Holiday Cheers, I found them. Messages from Andrew Mitchell. The tone had shifted from casual reminiscing to something intimate, careful, deliberate. I can't stop thinking about you. Remember that night in Chicago? One message read. Another. Seeing you again this weekend would make everything better. My stomach sank. Everything about the dates matched the times Violet claimed she was at shopping with friends or helping a client. Each alibi now felt like a carefully constructed lie. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I watched, waiting for patterns, letting evidence accumulate. Over the next few days, I took small, measured steps. Noting times she left the house, the cafes she visited, and the obscure errands that coincided with her interactions with Andrew. Every detail became a piece of a puzzle I couldn't ignore. Then came a break. One evening, I noticed her coat still hanging in the hallway, her shoes by the door. She hadn't returned from a supposed client meeting in the city. My heart pounded as I slipped into my coat, deciding to follow, carefully at a distance. I stayed in my truck, windows fogged, watching from across the street as she walked into a small cafe downtown. My pulse quickened when I saw him. A man tall, with dark hair and a warm smile, slipping into the booth across from her. They laughed softly, leaning close. Her hand rested on his arm just for a second, but it was enough. I stayed until they parted, watching as she hurried home, cheeks flushed and breath visible in the cold night air. I followed her back to the house, keeping a safe distance, heart hammering with a mix of dread and grim satisfaction. That night, I barely slept, turning over the events, planning my next steps. Over the following week, I became methodical. I checked statements and receipts, coffee shops, dinners, movie tickets, each transaction aligned with times she'd been working late or meeting friends. I found a small motel receipt tucked into the laundry pile, dated for the weekend she claimed to be home. My hands trembled as I held it, realizing she had gone further than I imagined. Yet, there were moments of uncertainty, red herrings meant to confuse. One day, she mentioned a surprise gift for me, claiming it was from a coworker. But when I checked, the envelope contained a note from an anonymous admirer in her yoga class. My mind reeled. Was this connected to Andrew, or just another innocent, unrelated intrigue? I couldn't tell anymore. Every trail seemed like both a clue and a trap. One night, while she showered, I slipped quietly into the office and accessed our shared computer. Files she thought long deleted had been archived, hidden in folders labeled memories. There, I found more. Photos of them together at local restaurants, screenshots of text messages, even a blurred selfie taken in the cafe I had parked across from. Each image was a nail in the coffin of trust one had carried for over a decade. The discovery left me cold, but also resolute. I had proof enough to confront her, enough to remove doubt. Yet, I waited, letting her sense my growing suspicion. Subtle glances, short answers, delayed responses. She started noticing my distance. One evening, over dinner, she asked carefully, "Kevin, you've been quiet. Is something wrong?" I replied with a forced calm, "Just tired from work." My silence was heavy, and I saw her flinch slightly. Days later, I arranged an unintentional coincidence outside the city. Running errands near the cafe, I spotted Andrew's car parked illegally. My heart twisted, but I stayed hidden, watching. Violet emerged, laughing, brushing snow from her coat, slipping into the car with him. That moment crystallized everything I had pieced together. The lies, the secrecy, the betrayal. Yet the worst part wasn't the evidence, it was the emotional calculus. 11 years, thousands of shared memories, and the quiet, corrosive disconnection we had ignored for months, maybe years. And here she was, choosing someone else, hiding the truth, layering deception with casual skill. I felt anger, hurt, disappointment, but above all, clarity. The tipping point came one evening when, after she left for a friend's dinner, I accessed her personal email, using the password she had carelessly typed in earlier. Messages from Andrew spilled across the screen. affectionate, insistent, emotionally intimate. One in particular froze me. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Everything feels alive when I'm with you." Attached was a photo of them laughing in the cafe, oblivious to the world. The discovery of intimate emails and photos represents a pivotal psychological rupture, shattering Kevin's remaining denial and confirming emotional betrayal. This moment evokes intense grief stages: shock, anger, and sadness, as undeniable evidence forces confrontation with reality, aligning with betrayal trauma theory where trust violation mimics PTSD, symptoms like intrusive thoughts and hyperarousal. Emotionally, Kevin's cold but resolute state reflects numbness as a coping mechanism, protecting against overwhelming pain while enabling methodical action. Interpersonally, Violet's layered deceptions highlight how secrecy erodes relational foundations, turning shared spaces into sites of suspicion. The moral dilemma of surveillance underscores privacy boundaries in relationships, yet justifies Kevin's actions as self-preservation. Consequences include deepened distrust, but this clarity propels personal growth, transforming passive suffering into active decision-making, emphasizing that betrayal's revelation, though devastating, can liberate by exposing unaddressed marital disconnects like emotional neglect. My breath caught. The quiet tension in our house, the small signs, the inconsistencies, all converged into undeniable proof. I closed the laptop slowly, heart pounding. The moral weight of surveillance, of invasion, pressed on me, but it was eclipsed by certainty. I now held the full picture. There was no excuse, no room for denial, no gray area left. Violet had crossed a line, and the foundation of our marriage had fractured beyond repair. That night, as I lay awake in the darkened bedroom, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the distant city traffic, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would confront her. Not with rage, not impulsively, but with measured calm, armed with proof, clarity, and the knowledge that our life together had irrevocably changed. The following evening, the house felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your own heartbeat sound loud. Violet was in the kitchen, humming softly while rinsing vegetables. I leaned against the doorway, my jacket still damp from the brief snowstorm earlier, the laptop in my bag heavy at my side. Tonight, I wouldn't ask, I wouldn't hint, I would confront. "Kevin?" Violet's voice cut through my thoughts. She looked up, eyes cautious. "Are you okay? You've been distant." I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a slow breath. "Violet, I need to show you something." I set the laptop on the table, opening it to the folder labeled Memories. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, revealing photos, emails, and screenshots of messages from Andrew. Her hand froze mid-air, holding a tomato, and the humming stopped. Her eyes widened as she scanned the screen. "Kevin, I held up a hand, my voice steady, though my chest ached. "Don't. Let me finish first." I clicked through the emails, letting them speak for themselves. Affectionate notes, plans for secret dinners, messages timestamped when she claimed to be elsewhere. Every lie she had told, every carefully constructed alibi, was laid bare. She slumped into the chair opposite me, eyes darting away, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. It's not what you think," she whispered. I closed the laptop gently, meeting her gaze. "Not what I think. Violet, these are your words, your photos. You've been seeing Andrew for months while telling me you were meeting friends, working late, running errands." My voice stayed calm, but the ache behind it was unmistakable. "I have every receipt, every message, every picture. I followed you, I verified everything. Don't tell me it's nothing." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. "Kevin, I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to tell you. Started as just reminiscing. I didn't think it would go this far. It went this far, Violet. You crossed a line. Emotional betrayal, lies, secrecy. That's not minor. It's everything." I stood, pacing the narrow space of the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. 11 years. 11 years of building something together, and you hid this under the guise of routine, under the guise of normal life. And me? I'm supposed to just accept that it got away from you." She shook her head, voice trembling. "No. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. Still do. But I lost myself, Kevin. I felt trapped. Financial pressure, work stress. It wasn't you. I didn't know how to cope." I laughed bitterly, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the kitchen. "Not me? Violet, you've been lying to me. Every time you said you were at a friend's, every time you said it was work. That was your choice. I didn't make this happen. You did." My hands shook slightly, a mixture of anger and grief. She buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I truly am. I wanted to stop before it went further, but I didn't know how. And when I saw you start noticing, I panicked." I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. "Panicked? You've been living a double life, Violet. I followed you, I checked receipts, I found emails, photos, proof of every lie. I know everything." The words hung in the air like frost. "And now, I have to decide what this means for us." She lifted her head, eyes red but determined. "Kevin, can we try? Therapy? Counseling? I'll end it with Andrew. I'll fix this. Please." I sat back, letting her words wash over me. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, wanted to hear hope in her voice, wanted to forgive. But the hurt ran deep, like a frostbite that didn't heal overnight. "I don't know if I can, Violet. Trust is fragile. And you broke it. Not once, not twice, but continuously. I have proof, I have dates, I have patterns. This isn't something that slips away with apologies." She reached across the table, hand trembling, and I pulled back instinctively. "Please, Kevin. I'm still me, still your wife. We can rebuild." I shook my head slowly, the decision crystallizing in my mind. We can't rebuild what was destroyed. Emotional betrayal doesn't just vanish. You chose secrecy, deception, and someone else over me. I can't unsee that. I won't unsee it. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, the faint sound of snow shifting on the roof. Violet's lips quivered, but she stayed silent, realizing the finality in my gaze. I stood, walking to the door, jacket on, keys in hand. I need space, time, and right now that means apart. I can't stay in a marriage where honesty is optional. Tears spilled finally, slow and quiet, as she whispered, "Kevin." I didn't turn back. "Goodbye, Violet." The confrontation exposes the raw interpersonal dynamics of betrayal, with Kevin's calm presentation of evidence contrasting Violet's initial denial and eventual admission, illustrating classic defense mechanisms like minimization. It started as reminiscing. Psychologically, this exchange triggers attachment wounds for both. Kevin's bitterness stems from violated expectations of loyalty, fostering feelings of inadequacy, while Violet's pleas reveal guilt and fear of abandonment. Emotionally, the scene captures grief's bargaining stage, where offers of therapy represent desperate attempts to restore equilibrium. Consequences of betrayal manifest as irreversible trust erosion, as Kevin's instinctive withdrawal signifies boundary setting for self-protection. Interpersonally, it reveals how unaddressed stressors like financial strain can lead to emotional affairs, widening relational rifts. Yet, Kevin's departure marks personal growth, prioritizing self-respect over reconciliation, teaching that forgiveness without accountability perpetuates cycles of hurt, ultimately empowering him to reclaim agency in the face of deception. The door closed behind me with a soft click, muffling the sound of her sobs. Outside, the cold hit me, but it felt sharp and cleansing, like truth itself. I slid into the car, started the engine, and let the heater warm me slowly. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt clarity. Later, as I drove under the flickering streetlights, replaying the confrontation in my mind, I realized something crucial. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It reveals truths you can't ignore. Violet's choices had exposed cracks in our marriage I had felt but never named. And now I had to choose my own path forward. One step at a time, one decision at a time. The morning after the confrontation, the apartment felt suffocatingly quiet, almost unnatural without Violet bustling around or the faint scent of her coffee drifting through the kitchen. I brewed a cup for myself, the bitter warmth grounding me as I sat by the window, watching the pale sun rise over the sleepy city streets. It was my first real morning alone in 11 years, and the weight of it pressed against me, both heavy and freeing. Violet had left early, claiming she needed to collect her thoughts. But I knew it was more than that. She was trying to salvage what little control she could over a situation she had created. I went through the house slowly, packing the small belongings I intended to take with me. Clothes, laptop, a few books I'd kept from college, framed photos of our travels together. Each object I touched reminded me of the life I had thought we shared, and with each one, I felt a strange mixture of grief and release. I stopped at the drawer with our joint finances. Over the past few weeks, I had quietly reviewed statements, tracing charges, receipts, and suspicious transfers. Patterns emerged. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, small weekend getaways, gifts bought in cash for someone else. The meticulous record-keeping I had done over the years for our shared accounts now served as evidence of betrayal. And with it came clarity. I could no longer ignore the truth. I took a deep breath and dialed our lawyer. "Morning, yes. I need to start the separation process," I said, voice firm but calm. No need for confrontation at this point. I'll provide documentation of assets and accounts." "Thank you." Hanging up, I felt a flicker of resolve. The path ahead wouldn't be painless, but it would be honest, and that in itself was a relief. Violet returned mid-morning, carrying a small duffel bag. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "Kevin, can we talk?" she asked, voice quiet, almost pleading. I gestured toward the living room chair. "We can talk, but it has to be practical, not emotional. I have decisions to make." She nodded, biting her lip. "I've packed a few things. I can stay with my sister for a while." I assessed her carefully, noting the fatigue etched into her face. "That's best. I'll finish packing my things today. We'll need to discuss accounts, bills, and the house. We'll keep this civil." Over the next few days, we moved with a mechanical precision. The emotional turbulence that had dominated our home for months now subsided into methodical action. Violet gathered her things. I moved my essentials to a small motel nearby. We communicated primarily through text and email, discussing logistics without confrontation. It was strange, this quiet efficiency, but also necessary. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving only debris that needed sorting. Driving my possessions to the motel, I felt a mix of isolation and liberation. For the first time in years, I had a space entirely my own. The silence was profound, but it was mine to fill or leave empty. I unpacked slowly, arranging the small apartment with care. Books on shelves, my guitar in the corner, a photo of a solo hiking trip I had taken last summer. These were reminders that life could continue, even without the foundation I had once believed unshakable. Friends reached out cautiously. My coworker, Tom, called. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Surviving," I replied. "It's strange. Everything is so quiet now." "Good. Focus on yourself. That's what matters. You've got control of your life again," he said. His words struck a chord. Control. For months, I had felt powerless, manipulated by secrecy and lies. Now that power was mine to reclaim. The legal processes moved steadily. Assets were divided fairly. No one contested anything. The house remained in Violet's name, which was fine. I didn't want the memories embedded in its walls. There were small tensions, sorting bills, ensuring the accounts were separate, but each action strengthened my sense of agency. I realized that leaving wasn't just about escape. It was about reclaiming life on my own terms. Emotionally, the first week was a roller coaster. Nights were quiet but lonely. I replayed the confrontation, Violet's tears, the shock of discovery, and the letters, receipts, and emails that had confirmed the betrayal. Anger surged at unexpected moments. When I recalled her smile at Andrew's apartment, or when a familiar scent reminded me of what we had lost. But these feelings were tempered by resolve. I was learning to distinguish grief from guilt, betrayal from my own responsibility. On the fourth day, I went for a walk along the river near my motel. The crisp winter air filled my lungs, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly with each step. Snow crunched underfoot, and the sun reflected off the ice-streaked water like shards of glass. It was bitterly cold, but the world felt real again, unmediated by lies or half-truths. This small act of movement became a ritual, grounding me in the present. Violet sent a text that evening, tentative and apologetic. "Kevin, I'm truly sorry for everything. I understand you can't forgive me." I paused, staring at the screen. Forgiveness was not the same as reconciliation. "I need time," I typed back, and then locked my phone. Control meant responding on my terms, not hers. In the weeks that followed, I built routines to anchor myself. Mornings began with coffee, journaling, and reflection. Work remained a steady constant. I drove long hauls, but now the road felt like a meditation, not an escape. I joined a small gym, started cooking meals for myself, and even reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of marital tension. Each step was small, but cumulative, slowly reconstructing my sense of self. Emotionally, I began to notice subtle shifts. I no longer felt the gnawing anxiety that had plagued me at every unexpected phone vibration. I could sleep without waking to scan email or text messages for hidden meanings. I even laughed, sometimes quietly, sometimes with friends, without the background hum of suspicion. Freedom, I realized, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about reclaiming ordinary moments and filling them with honesty. Occasionally, I reflected on what had gone wrong. Financial stress had strained us, yes, but the deeper issue was emotional distance. Violet had sought comfort elsewhere, but I had unknowingly enabled the divide by avoiding difficult conversations and retreating into routine. Understanding this didn't excuse her betrayal, but it clarified the landscape of our relationship. I could not change the past, but I could choose how to live moving forward. By the end of the month, the physical and emotional separation was complete. I signed final paperwork, moved fully into my new apartment, and began planning small adventures. Weekend hikes, a photography class, trips along the countryside. Each act reinforced independence, a reclaiming of the life I had allowed to slip through my fingers. Post-confrontation, Kevin's decision to separate and rebuild embodies resilience and personal growth amid betrayal's aftermath. Psychologically, this phase aligns with post-traumatic growth theory, where adversity fosters self-efficacy through routines like journaling and exercise, transforming grief into empowerment. Emotionally, the roller coaster of anger and loneliness gives way to acceptance, as he distinguishes his responsibility from Violet's choices, reducing self-blame. Interpersonally, minimal contact enforces healthy boundaries, preventing codependent reconciliation and allowing mutual reflection on marital flaws like emotional distance. Consequences include initial isolation but yield liberation, with reclaimed control over finances and space symbolizing autonomy. This period highlights denial's dissolution into insight, teaching that betrayal, while corrosive to trust, can catalyze self-discovery, stronger social connections, and a redefined identity, proving recovery involves not just healing wounds but actively shaping a fulfilling future. One evening, I stood by the balcony, watching the sun set over the river, the sky painted in muted oranges and purples. The wind carried the scent of earth and water. I felt calm, finally. Betrayal had broken us, but it had also forced clarity and growth. I had faced the consequences, made difficult choices, and reclaimed agency over my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living on my terms, with freedom, with clarity, and with a quiet confidence that I could navigate whatever lay ahead. 6 months had passed since that confrontation in Violet's apartment, and life had settled into a rhythm that was entirely my own. The divorce was finalized quietly in a small courtroom downtown. There were no witnesses, no dramatic arguments, just signatures on forms and a curt handshake as we acknowledged the end. Violet's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, calmer than I had seen in years, and I returned a nod of understanding. We were no longer husband and wife, two people whose paths had intertwined, now parting with the clarity that truth, however painful, can bring. I moved fully into the riverfront apartment, arranging it as a sanctuary of my own making. The mornings began with the ritual I had cultivated. Strong coffee, journal in hand, and a slow, deliberate look out over the water. The sun glinted off the currents like molten metal, and I felt an almost physical sense of freedom settle into my chest. Here I was the architect of my life again. My routines were intentional, not imposed by habit or obligation. I cooked my meals, organized my space, and chose the music that accompanied me through the day, sounds that echoed the calm, reflective pace I now preferred. Work remained an anchor, though in a different way than before. Driving long hauls across the Midwest, I had once seen the road as an escape, a temporary retreat from stress and distance. Now it was an arena of reflection, a canvas for thought. Each highway and small-town diner became a space to consider what mattered, to plan for the future, and to engage with life fully awake. Even the repetitive hum of the engine became a meditation, a soundtrack to this newfound independence. I also began reconnecting with old friends, something I had neglected in the years of financial tension and marital strain. Dinner with Tom, a coworker who had always offered steady advice, became a regular fixture. He introduced me to a small photography group along the river, and I rediscovered the quiet joy of capturing fleeting moments. The frost glinting on a tree branch, a heron taking flight, the subtle patterns of traffic reflected in puddles after rain. These small connections reminded me that the world held more than betrayal, more than loss. It held possibility. Emotionally, the change was profound. The initial grief, anger, and disbelief had given way to clarity. I no longer woke at night, heart racing, imagining scenarios or rereading old texts for hidden meaning. Suspicion, once a constant companion, had dissolved. Even memories of Violet's betrayal were now tempered by understanding. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The weight of her deceit no longer dictated my thoughts or my feelings. I occasionally reflected on what had gone wrong in our marriage. The financial pressure had been a catalyst, yes, but the deeper fissure was emotional distance. Violet had sought connection elsewhere, a truth that was painful to acknowledge. I realized, though, that my own avoidance, my focus on work over engagement, had widened the gap. This reflection did not lead to regret for leaving. Rather, it led to insight. Understanding the dynamics allowed me to navigate my emotions without self-blame and with a readiness to engage authentically in future relationships. Violet and I maintained minimal contact, limited to necessary discussions about finances or property we had once shared. Each interaction was civil but brief. I learned that forgiveness did not require reconciliation, and that peace was possible even in the absence of closure from the other person. She had her life and I had mine. The betrayal, though painful, had clarified the boundaries that I needed to maintain. In the quiet evenings, I often walked along the riverbank, the air crisp and alive. Snow melted underfoot in early spring, and the scent of thawing earth carried reminders that life, like the seasons, moved forward. The subtle joys, watching sunrise over water, feeling wind against my face, savoring a well-cooked meal, became proof of the life I could create alone, yet fully inhabited. Independence, I discovered, was not lonely. It was empowering. One afternoon, as I photographed a flock of geese skimming the river's surface, I felt a lightness that had eluded me for years. The betrayal, once a source of pain and anger, now existed as a lesson etched into memory. I understood the limits of trust, the importance of vigilance, and the value of self-respect. More importantly, I understood that growth often comes from endings, not beginnings. Occasionally, Violet crossed my mind, but without bitterness. I hoped she found her own clarity, that she confronted the emotional patterns that had led to her choices. But my concern was no longer entangled with anger or longing. It was quiet and distant, like watching a bird fly overhead. My own life had become the focus, and that focus was rich, textured, and fully mine. 6 months later, I joined a weekend hiking group. Among strangers who knew nothing of my past, I found community and laughter, the simple pleasure of conversation unburdened by manipulation or secrecy. I began planning longer trips alone, to the Rockies, to small Midwestern towns I had always wanted to see. Each excursion reinforced a profound truth. Freedom is not granted by circumstance. It is claimed by action, intention, and reflection. By now, the apartment felt alive. The walls, once echoing silence, now vibrated with music, laughter from friends, and my own quiet humming as I cooked or organized my space. The river outside mirrored the sky above, changeable, unpredictable, yet steady. My life, once tethered to uncertainty and betrayal, now reflected my choices, deliberate and informed. I had rebuilt not just a life but a self, one capable of recognizing betrayal without being defined by it. I had learned that trust, while fragile, could be measured not only in others but in my own judgment and boundaries. I understood that emotional pain was not a prison. It was a lens, revealing clarity, strength, and direction. In the end, the lessons were simple but profound. Honesty in relationships is essential, boundaries protect integrity, and self-respect is non-negotiable. Betrayal, while devastating, can catalyze growth if met with reflection and courage. The marriage had ended, yes, but the story had not. My chapter, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now brimmed with possibility, purpose, and autonomy. I stood on the balcony one evening, the sky streaked with the soft lavender and gold of sunset. The river flowed steadily, oblivious to human drama, yet emblematic of the life I had reclaimed. I breathed deeply, feeling the tension release from my shoulders. I was no longer a man shadowed by deceit. I was a man fully alive, fully accountable for his path, and fully empowered to navigate the road ahead. Freedom, I realized, was both the journey and the destination. Overall, the story traces Kevin's journey from subtle suspicion to empowerment, emphasizing psychological themes of trust erosion, denial, betrayal's consequences, and profound personal growth. Initially, denial shields him from pain, but accumulating evidence forces confrontation, revealing how unaddressed marital stressors like financial pressure and emotional disconnect enable infidelity. Betrayal's fallout, grief, anger, and relational fracture highlights interpersonal vulnerabilities, yet Kevin's methodical response underscores resilience, transforming trauma into clarity and independence. Emotionally, the narrative illustrates attachment theory's insights. Violated bonds provoke deep wounds, but boundary setting and self-reflection facilitate healing. Ultimately, growth emerges from adversity, as Kevin reclaims agency, fosters new connections, and embraces autonomy, demonstrating that while betrayal shatters illusions, it can forge a stronger self, with lessons in vigilance, honesty, and self-respect enduring beyond the marriage's end.